Good afternoon, good evening. So glad to be with you all. I'm filling in for Wes Mallory this evening. We've been going through the book of Job. Job, most of you know, he's probably one of the most righteous men ever, but he had everything taken from him. His livestock, his children, he had all his beasts of labor were taken from him, and everything that he had, even his health, was taken. And so he's had it as bad as just about anybody. He's righteous as just about anybody, but now he's had it just about as bad as anybody. We've got his three friends come to comfort him, but they're miserable comforters. We see the back and forth between Job and his three friends, and that's what we've been going through. In last class, we just introduced a maybe you don't really call him fourth friend, a fifth character. He's not one of the three friends. Three friends: Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar. Fourth character, Job, and that we've got Elihu as that new character. You see his schedule so far on schedule. Wes will be back next Sunday, God willing. And we introduced Elihu last class. The mystery of Elihu is that before chapter 32, he's not mentioned. After his speech ends in 37, he's not mentioned. God doesn't specifically say, with Elihu, I'm pleased. God doesn't specifically rebuke Elihu. With Job and the three comforters, we have specific word from God on that. Job is declared righteous at the beginning of the book and at the end of the book. Through this back and forth with the three friends, God, at the end, God does rebuke Job, saying that he's spoken words without knowledge. In Job 40, verse 8, obviously skipping ahead, but God's going to say to Job, will you even put me in the wrong? God will say to Job, will you condemn me that you may be in the right? That's what God says to Job in Job 40 and verse 8. So Job is rebuked, but he is restored, and he is righteous, and we're told that elsewhere in the Bible as well. Regarding the friends, again skipping ahead, but we want to know what to make of these characters. Regarding the friends, in chapter 42 and verse 7, the Lord said to Eliphaz, my anger burns against you and against your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. And then Job is called to pray for them, and the Lord accepts Job's prayer, and God says that he will not deal with them according to their folly. So they're also restored to God. So they didn't speak what was right about God, but they're restored. So we kind of know what to make everybody else, but with Elihu we don't have the specific rebuke or the specific from God, Elihu is my servant. We don't have it. So because of that, we have differing views. And I didn't write all this. If I say something you think it's a really good point, good chance I took it from Wes's notes. But if you disagree with anything, I'll take the blame. But I didn't write all this myself, but this is some different views of some Bible scholars. We talked briefly about some people think that Elihu's a secondary addition. I don't think that, but again, we'll look at the Word. Last time we read chapters 32 and 33, we may do more of a broader overview, trying to get all the way through chapter 37 tonight, but we'll look at the Word again tonight. You'll make your own determination. Some people, Some scholars would say that Elihu lacks wisdom and understanding, and when he speaks, it's just more of the same, what the friends say. So that's a take. A third view, Elihu is the best man can do, but still shows inadequacies of man's attempts to understand the ways of God. A fourth view, Elihu provides a genuine preparation for God. And then another view would be that Elihu answers exactly right, and God confirms that. So there's some different views, and maybe you'll combine some of those to craft your own view. But whatever your view will be should be off of the word that you read as we go through the text. I love the comments we got last time. And again, it's a great section of the book for comments, because there's a lot of different ways you can look at Elihu. I said last time I have a positive view of Elihu, but you gotta make your own view. This is a brief overview of chapters 32 through 37, which are Elihu's chapters. So just gives you a little idea what to prepare for, what we'll be talking about as we go through. And we'll finish up Elihu tonight, God willing. Next Sunday, Wes will take you through God's going to answer Job out of the whirlwind. So that's what we're leading up to. That'll be chapter 38. So we'll try to get through chapter 37 tonight. We read chapter 32 last time. So we know that Elihu was son of Barachel, a Buzite, from the family of Ram. We talked about last time, maybe Elihu's a Hebrew. He's got a Hebrew sounding name. Might be translated to God is He. And family of Ram, we've got a family of Ram in the line of David. So we think Elihu's obviously a different character than these other guys. The other guys might be Edomite. Elihu might be Hebrew. He's younger. That's why he was waiting to talk. He burns with anger. And why, if you were here last time, or even if you weren't, why does he burn with anger? And again, we're looking at Job chapter 32 now, and Elihu he'll tell you himself why he's burning with anger. But what do we talk about? What's got him burning up? Yes, that's exactly right. Job justified himself rather than God. The friends did not find an answer, and you can see that in verse 3 there, verses 2 and 3. I really want to key in on that. He burned with anger. Verse 2. He burned with anger at Job because he justified himself rather than God. I think. My view on Elihu, he's not angry. He's not angry for himself. He's been listening, but he's not personally offended. But he's angry on behalf of God. Job defended himself, but who is there defending God? We do see, as we read through Job, some defense of God from Job, from the friends. We see the friends focus on God's justice, but their focus, I believe, is condemning Job. Job's focus was defending himself, and Elihu, he's saying God is greater than man. I think that's the crux of what he's saying here. And the defense of God is what's got him angry. I think of, I think that's a good reason to be angry. I think we talked about gentleness this morning. Jonathan was preaching. Jesus obviously was very gentle. He still flipped over those tables of the money changers in the temple because he had zeal for the house of God, zeal for God. And I think that's Elihu's main motivation here. And the other thing that Elihu says in verse 32, he says that it's the spirit of man, the breath of the Almighty that makes him understand. So Elihu's saying, these things I'm going to say, I didn't come up with them myself. It's the spirit of man and the breath of the Almighty God that gives understanding. And Elihu's going to say over and over again that he's a man of God. He's going to say that he's created by God, and that it'll indicate that he's got the Spirit of God. Any comments on our review of the introduction of Elihu and the introduction of the book? Any comments before we go to chapter 33? Yes, I agree. Dr. Crispell said that they're dealing with the problem of evil in the world. They can't understand why this has happened to Job. The friends will blame it on, Job's sin, but Job is trying to explain that, that he is a righteous man. And Job knows this has not happened to him because of his sin. That's what he'll say. But I agree. They're all wrestling with that issue. Same issue that many struggle with today, the problem of evil in the world. And Job, thank God for the book of Job. What a great resource for us, to understand the problem. We see other people wrestle through it, and we see what God's answer will be to what they're wrestling with. Yeah, I totally agree with what Matt said there. Elihu waits for the older men to finish. They are done. They have nothing else to say. And Elihu does have something to say, and he's not gonna let the fact that he's young stop him from saying what he believes the truth is. Yep, I think that's a really good point.
prosperity gospel that we hear from so many people on TV or the radio or whatever, that all you need to do is you have to follow God and you got to send in money to me and he's going to bless you abundantly. And if he doesn't bless you abundantly, it's the same theology that we see in the book of Job coming from his three friends, that they've been saying, if you're good, God's going to bless you. If you're evil, God's going to punish you.
I'm glad you said that. I agree. He's saying that it's the problem of evil in the world, but also they're wrestling with kind of the prosperity gospel idea of, if you're doing the right thing, you're going to have all these blessings, and that's really how Job's friends and even Elihu, if you want to, if you're going to be critical of Elihu, and we should look at him both ways, try to figure out, are his words true? Are they good? Or is he making the same mistakes, just the same arguments as his friend? We should look at it critically. If you're going to be critical of Elihu, some of what he says can come off that way too, like God's always going to bless the righteous. And we always say, God will make it right in the end. God is just, but we know a lot more about the kingdom of heaven than what we see, described here. And so we're looking for a heavenly reward, and they're just talking about earthly blessings for everything that's described here. So we really would like, Job and his friends like to hear Elihu say, God will make it right in the by and by. It's not what they say, but I think it's a really good point how it relates to evil in the world, how it relates to the prosperity gospel. I think it definitely does. I think all that ties in. Any other comments right now? We read chapter 33 last time as well. Again, Elihu lets us know that he's a man created by God. He says he's towards God as you are, Job. He said, I'm towards God as you are, Job. I'm pinched off from a piece of clay also. And he says, made by the Spirit of God, the breath of the Almighty gives me life. And then he's going to quote Job. Starting in chapter 33 and verse 9. You say, I am pure without transgression. I am clean, there is no iniquity in me. Behold, he finds occasion against me. He counts me as his enemy. He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my paths. Behold, in this you are not right. I will answer you, for God is greater than man. So he quotes Job. Job did say those things, and we can look back at, and we will look back into hopefully tonight, have a chance to look back into chapters 21, chapters 29, see some of what Job says to reference against these claims that Elihu's making, but I believe he does quote Job correctly, and Elihu tells him, in this you are not right, and I will answer you, for God is greater than man. For God is greater than man. That's the crux of his argument, I believe. He doesn't answer exactly like we might, when we talk about the problem of sin in the world or the prosperity gospel, but his argument is all built around, for God is greater than man. And Elihu will also make the point that God does answer. One thing that Job says is, God will not answer me. I cannot have trial with him. Elihu will say that God does answer, that God does speak to man in multiple ways to save him from the pit. So that's part of what Elihu will say in chapter 33. Anything I missed in chapters 32 and 33 that you want to comment on before we move into chapter 34? So I mentioned I would like to look back at some of Job's words. If we look back to Job chapter 21 and start in verse 7, we'll see some of Job's speech. So I'll read there in Job chapter 21, starting in verse 7. Job says, "Why do the wicked live, reach old age, and grow mighty in power? Their offspring are established in their presence, and their descendants before their eyes. Their houses are safe from fear, and no rod of God is upon them. Their bull breeds without fail. Their cow calves and does not miscarry. They send out their little boys like a flock, and their children dance. They sing to the tambourine and the lyre and rejoice to the sound of the pipe. They spend their days in prosperity, and in peace they go down to Sheol. They say to God, 'Depart from us. We do not desire the knowledge of your ways. What is the Almighty that we should serve him? And what do we profit? What profit do we get if we pray to him? Behold, is not their prosperity in their hand? The counsel of the wicked is far from me. How often is it that the lamp of the wicked is put out, that their calamity comes upon them, that God distributes pains in his anger, that they are like straw before the wind, and like chaff that the storm carries away. You say, God stores up their iniquity for their children. Let him pay it out to them, that they may know it. Let their own eyes see their destruction, and let them drink of the wrath of the Almighty. For what do they care for their houses after them, when the number of their months is cut off? Will any teach God knowledge, seeing that he judges those who are on high? One dies in his full vigor, being wholly at ease and secure. His pail's full of milk, and the marrow of his bones moist. Another dies in bitterness of soul, never having tasted prosperity. They lie down alike in the dust, and the worms cover them." So Job says that the wicked do prosper. He says that the righteous and the wicked lie down together alike. He says to his friends, "You say that their children will suffer for their sins." But Job is saying, let God pay it out to them that they may know it, for whether they care for their houses after them. And Job even says, will any teach God knowledge, seeing that he judges those who are on high? Says, no one to teach God. Job is saying what he wishes God would do, but there's no one to teach God. That's what Job says. So Elihu is going to give strong words back to Job, but I want to remember that the context of Job's words, because Job starts with strong words. Now Job's obviously hurting, but it's strong words for sure. Looking over to Job 29, and again in verse 7. I won't read this whole section in Job chapter 29, but Job's going to describe here all the things that he's enjoyed. He's going to say that he was a ruler. He's going to say when he walks in, everyone stands up. And he's going to say, he puts on righteousness and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. So he's saying he was a good ruler. He said that he was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame and a father to the needy. And I searched out the cause of him who I did not know. Job will say that the afflicted he looked out for. And in 29 and verse 25, he says, I chose their way and sat as chief, and I lived like a king among his troops, like one who comforts mourners. So Job describes himself. He's going to describe everything that he enjoyed. He's going to go on to ask why it was all taken away from him. But in chapter 29, he's really just describing all the things that he enjoyed. He was a ruler. Everyone respected him. He said he was a good ruler. He was just, and we know he was righteous. He said he was just. He looked out for the afflicted. So that's how Job describes himself. And then I think that gives good context when we get into chapter 34. I'll start off in Job chapter 34. We're back to Elihu. He's talking with Job and his audience. So chapter 34, verse 1, I'll read at least the first 10 verses there. Then Elihu answered and said, "Hear my words, you wise men, and give ear to me, you who know. For the ear tests words, as the palate tastes food. Let us choose what is right. Let us know among ourselves what is good. For Job has said, I am in the right, and God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I am counted a liar. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, who travels in company with evildoers and walks with wicked men? For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. Therefore, hear me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong." So, it's a small sampling of chapter 34, but we do see Elihu has strong words for Job. He says, what man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, travels in the company of evildoers, walks with wicked men? And he said, for he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. Job did say that. He said, the wicked are not punished. The wicked and the righteous both lay down alike in the dust. So, and we see that God will even, that's part of what God says to Job. I mean, God will say to Job, will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? So we see that some of the criticism that Elihu has for Job, God also had for Job. We'll look just one more. I'm not going to read the whole chapter for the sake of time, but we'll skip down to Job chapter 34, and I'll read in verse 34 to the end of the chapter. Elihu says, men of understanding will say to me, and the wise man who hears me will say, Job speaks without knowledge, his words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like wicked men. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hand among us and multiplies his words against God. So I've given you a small sampling, chapter 34, of what Elihu's saying to Job. Does anyone care to comment? Do you think that what Elihu's saying is true? Is it justified? Is it right what he's saying to Job here? Yes.
Well, going with what you had said about the prosperity gospel, that if you are righteous, then you're going to be blessed, and your wealth is going to be multiplied. And if your wealth isn't multiplied, then you must not be doing as good as you think you are. But one of the things that's occurred to me just in the reading of chapter 34 is Job seems to think, since all of this affliction is happening to me,
Yes, I think you're exactly right. We can look, like you said, we can look different at God when we don't get what we expect. When we don't get the prosperity, when we feel we've been righteous, or even when we have been righteous and we don't get the prosperity, we can look at God different. We can speak against God. I think that's exactly what we're dealing with here. Job has spoken. Job was a righteous man. He spoke out against God. And Elihu, I don't think he's got all the answers. And again, I don't think he says everything that we would like him to say, but he does make that point that God is greater. I think he's getting at that point that God, to Job, God is not giving you exactly what you expect, but God is still greater, so great, hard to put into words. I think that's some of what Elihu's getting at here. I think that's a great comment. Anybody else want to comment on chapter 34? Yes, I think that's a great comment by Tim. He said Elihu's bringing into view God's sovereignty. We can't always see it, but God's working all things for His glory and for His good. And I would say even for our good. Even though Job is suffering, we get to see that he gets restored and things are going to work out for Job. But obviously Job doesn't get to see that, but God's sovereignty is, Job can't see that yet here, I should say, but God's sovereignty is what Elihu is bringing into the picture. I think that's a great comment. And if you there's, like I say, you can Elihu says some good things. You can be critical of what he says too. There's a lot of differing views, so we won't beat anybody up tonight, probably. But any other comments on chapter 34? Yes.
God did not rebuke Elihu, and then Job never said anything bad about Elihu. It's something to think about.
Yes, yeah, just the comment that the three friends are rebuked, but neither God nor Job speaks out against Elihu. It's interesting thinking of the placement. Elihu waited for everybody to finish, but nobody responds to Elihu. God's immediately after, God's going to speak out of the whirlwind. That's the next thing we have recorded for us. So I don't have the answer necessarily, but just the question of, why is God allowing Elihu to speak? God's going to say some of the same things that Elihu is going to say. But could God have said it himself? Why do we need Elihu in this book? I mean, that's why one of the differing views is Elihu's written in. We don't like Elihu. We didn't need him. But I mean, I believe just Elihu was there. He was allowed to speak. So then you're asking why? Why did God allow him to speak, and specifically allow Elihu to speak for God? And not rebuke him. Trying to think why is this here? because God's going to speak for himself in a moment. That's the next section when Elihu's done. I agree with you. To this point, where we are, chapter 34, talking about what Job said in chapter 29, Job is very open about the fact that his steps were easy, that he had it good, and Matt, made the comment that to this point he's not been able to maybe empathize with the suffering that people have, and I think that's a great point. And Job Job doesn't know, but he's gonna get restored. He'll get to be a ruler again, and his legacy lives on that we learned from him tonight. And so, it's to our benefit that Job went through all that. Job when Job's talking in chapter 30, he doesn't have that foresight. He doesn't know that his suffering will be to our benefit. Any more comments before we move on to chapter 35? Chapter 35 is short, so 16 verses, so I'll read it. It says, "And Elihu answered and said, 'Do you think this to be just? Do you say, it is my right before God, that you ask, what advantage have I? How am I better off than if I had sinned? I will answer you, and your friends with you. Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds which are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give to him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness concerns a man like yourself, and your righteousness is son of man. Because of the multitude of oppressions, people cry out. They call for help because of the arm of the mighty. But none says, where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth and makes us wiser than the birds of the heavens? There they cry out, but he does not answer because of the pride of evil men. Surely God does not hear an empty cry, nor does the Almighty regard it. How much less when you say that you do not see him, that the case is before him and you are waiting for him? And now because his anger does not punish and he does not take much note of transgression, Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge. So Elihu again is going to take Job's words, quote him, and criticize him. Verse 3, I've selected a few verses that pop out to me as I read through chapter 35. Verse 3, and Job is asked, how is he better off than if he had sinned? Elihu, that's the question Elihu's answering. How are you better off than if you had sinned? Elihu's going to say in verse 6 and 7, well, let me answer you. He's going to say, let me tell you this. if you had sinned, what do you accomplish against him? What can you possibly do to God? And he's going to say, if you're righteous, what do you give to him, or what does he receive from your hand? And Elihu is also going to say, God's not going to hear an empty cry. How much less when you say you do not see him, that the case is before him and you are waiting for him. So that's another thing that Job has said. The case is before God, but I don't see him. He's saying God's not answering me. Elihu's saying God doesn't answer an empty prayer. And we see more of that criticism. Job opens his mouth in empty talk. He multiplies words without knowledge. Anything pop out to you as we look at chapter 35? Yeah, I think that's well said. He's saying that that Job has kind of, he said that God's shooting arrows at him. It's kind of a God versus Job versus God kind of thing. Elihu's saying God's not wrong. I mean, Job has said I'm not wrong, but that's not exactly the right way to like paint the problem, right? It's not God versus Job. The trials should bring God closer to Job, and I think in the end they will, but we'll need God to intervene. We'll see, God will speak out of the whirlwind to Job. I'm slow, I know, I'm slow, but chapter 36. And chapter 37, we call the workings of God. And they're really going to be like a prequel for chapter 38. Elihu will say some of the same things that God himself will say. Elihu will point out some of the majesty of God. Thank you so much.